solutions, particularly on the risk reduction side? What role can that play when designing or implementing insurance solutions? So we have two presentations, one from Professor Michael Beck, who has been doing a lot of work on this, also in the context of coral reefs and mangroves. And then we have the reinsurer perspective, which I think is a really good sort of, insight in where the sector is, because, you know, there are many pilots out there, but it gives us also a chance to see, you know, where are we? Is this all sort of standardized and easy to do, or are we still really at a pilot stage? So without further ado, Michael, I know you're sitting somewhere really nice in the sunshine, which I think you might just want to say to us where you're based. I think you're, well, I leave that to you, but over to you. We're looking forward to your input.
Yep, thanks, Swenja. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I am in the Bahamas and I am benefiting from coral reefs. I will keep my camera off for the presentation just to preserve bandwidth. Most of the time it's been fine, but I'll just do that to be sure. As we've kind of been covering throughout the talks already, we know that coastal risks are rising. We know that there's a lot of interest in nature-based solutions. We know that we need to be able to quantify those benefits if we want to be able to realize some of the opportunities described in the previous poll. The good news is that we can measure those benefits, that we have been using them to identify incentives for nature-based solutions. And not only will I show you some of those, but I'll show you how to use our data to be able to estimate these benefits in your projects. Next slide. As you know, kind of well covered by Wouter and others, we follow approaches for the assessment of flood risk and the benefits provided by mangroves that are used across the insurance and engineering sectors. I'm not going to go through all the steps of the model, but basically you need to understand from offshore dynamics of water all the way to the economic consequences onshore. Next slide. These are the many stages of the modeling. Again, I'm not going to go through all those. I just need you to know that we go all the way from tropical cyclones across to flooding onshore, ultimately assessing damages to people and property, both with and without these ecosystems in place. Next slide. And what that looks like in terms of mapping, and I'm showing this example here for the Bahamas, but this is the basis for all of the assessments of both risk and habitat benefits that we do globally. Ultimately, we bring them down to 90 by 90 meter flooding maps. In this case, this is for a 1 in 10 year storm event. The areas in blue are the areas that are flooded at present in Grand Bahama Island. And the areas in red are those that would be flooded if you lost mangroves. And essentially, we estimate the benefits provided by keeping those mangroves in place by assessing the people and property underneath those flood envelopes. Of course, using depth damage curves as well. Next slide. Doing that, and again, using across the globe flood risk and mangrove benefits assessed at that 90 by 90 meter scale, we can identify where mangroves are providing some of the greatest benefits to people and property, something we published a couple of years back, and data that I'm going to show you how you can use. But you can see that in these 20-kilometer study units in which we average these benefits, you can see that mangroves are providing annual flood reduction benefits in the hundreds of millions of dollars in places. Key hotspots, significant benefits. Next slide. You can also use these, obviously you can use these annual estimates of flood protection benefits to also get at the present value of mangroves for flood reduction. and those can be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per hectare. And this is particularly important, obviously, if you're going to be doing benefit cost analyses. And in a paper in review, we've got restoration costs across the Caribbean and Florida, put that together with these mangrove projects, assuming that they're a 30-year infrastructure project. And you can see that mangroves will provide significant benefit to cost ratios across the Caribbean. Again, here just expressed as present value, which you can think of as the break-even cost of restoration. Next slide. Okay, but what I want to focus on really is just to say how you can use some of this data in your own projects to estimate benefits. Okay, so on the left is Florida and the Southeast US. The green dots are where we provide data from our global flooding analysis of the benefits. In the middle, I've imagined that you've set up a mangrove restoration project there in green with a mangrove in it, hypothetically assumed to be about 100 hectares. I've highlighted in the red circles 2 of the points where we're providing data. You can go online to that data there at the address on the right. To access that information on benefits. And then in the bottom of the slide here, I've shown how you would go about using those points to estimate both the people protected and the property protected. And you can see, you go across here and you see that, well, this project might protect 300 people per year based on our estimates, or rather, 300 people per year in these projects. Across the entire 100 hectares, or some $28 million. So that provides a way to be able to assess the potential benefits of given projects in these areas. You could also, where you have estimates of social vulnerability in these areas, for example, the percent of the population with a PPP less than $15, you could apply that calculation to these people benefits to understand how many vulnerable people were being protected. So this is a relatively straightforward way to be able to access and use these data to see what likely benefits might be and might be sufficient for much project reporting. Advance one, please. And you can see down in the lower right, this comes from some work that we've been doing. Can you go back for a second? Doing with Vrije. So there will soon be a sustainable development impact standard for estimating coastal resilience benefits, where all of these methods and approaches and the use of these data, in addition to more site-specific analyses, will be available. Next slide. Using these kinds of analyses, we've taken a look at where mangroves have been lost since 1996 and what benefits have been lost because of that. And then we've turned that on its head and said, if we were to restore those most recently lost mangroves, where would we achieve the greatest restoration benefits per hectare? And this is some work that we're doing with the World Bank and the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance. So this gives you hotspots for restoration benefits. Next slide. We've done the same type of work for coral reefs, although we're hoping to update some of the modeling that we've done there. But all of the kinds of work that I've just showed you for mangroves are the sorts of things that are possible for coral reefs as well from our work. Next slide. Okay, so to sum it up, we know that habitats benefit lives and livelihoods. We actually can rigorously value these benefits, at least in terms of flood protection and many others. I hope to convince you that you can use our data to estimate some of those project benefits. And what we really hope is that supports innovative funding and approaches for the conservation and restoration of these habitats. And if you could advance. we have a whole variety of studies and access to information through our Coastal Resilience Lab website with the address below. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that. And I think, this is, I also noticed we put up the link there to the files. I think that's really useful. And we'll come back to maybe some of your case studies later on when a colleague from AXA will also talk about, some experiences of, implementing that in an insurance context. Thank you so much. Let's move to a more, sort of different perspective. Well, we call it the reinsurer perspective or the industry perspective. I'm very pleased to invite Christian Wertli from Swiss Re to share a few insights from their work on nature-based solutions.
Thank you very much, Swenja, and I appreciate the invitation to speak today. Can you hear me? All right, good. So unless Michael, I'm actually not based in a sunny spot. I'm actually based in rainy Zurich at the moment. So for those who haven't heard about Swiss Re, we are a large reinsurance company. So we provide insurance for insurance companies. However, we also primary insurer. So we are one of the big players in protecting risks. So with that one, I start my presentation. Can we move to the next slide, please? Well, I think you have to click 2 or 3 times. Sorry, I didn't realize it's animated. Next, click, please. Yeah, good. Okay. I just want to, can we go back, please? I just wanted to share some figures with you to basically put some value on nature. So Swiss Re Institute, we actually estimate that around 55% of the global GDP depends on intact biodiversity and ecosystem. If you look at tourism or value derived from tourism that depends on coral reef, we actually estimate that about 36 billion income from tourism depends on coral reef. Again, with coral reefs, if coral reefs are not intact, potentially 272 billion of asset might actually be exposed to storms. And if you look at million of people, for instance, 15 million people or 65 billion of property assets are actually protected by mangrove. So actually, the point we wanted to make here is nature really provides value, and actually nature has also price tag. So if you move to the next slide, please. Now, what is really important is to quantify the risks, because ultimately all decisions should actually be data-driven or science-driven. So Swiss Re came up with what we call here a biodiversity and ecosystem index. So it's a geoportal which you can access, and it gives you on a 1 by 1 kilometer mapping, gives you a certain, shows you how vulnerable certain areas are in respect of loss of biodiversity and ecosystem impact. So we distinguish between 10 different values which you can select. For instance, habitat loss, pollination, vegetation, water quality, water availability, and so on. So what is important in that one, it doesn't give you a price or a cost of the risk, but it shows you if you have certain projects, how vulnerable these projects are in respect of these criteria. So the data inside is for us always the starting point. Now we go to the next page, please. So if you place the value on nature, for instance, I already mentioned a couple before on the initial slide, but what was also interesting, for instance, in the UK estimated that about 2 billion positive value are created by nature in respect of physical and mental health. So, I mean, sometimes we think this is intangible, but it's very important to actually qualify what real benefits are derived out of nature. So with that one, we go to the insurance aspect. So let's move to the next page, please. So how can insurance help? So I think there are definitely three areas. First of all, we protect revenues derived from the nature asset. Very easy examples are, for instance, tourism. If a coral reef is destroyed, if a storm goes through an area, destroys the habitat, then tourism suffers. So basically income is lost for the tourism industry, for restaurants, however, also for the government, because you get less tax money and so on. So protection of revenue is one element that insurance can do. Secondly, we protect the nature asset. For instance, we restore again coral reefs, mangroves, forestries after a major event. However, I think also very, very important, we can use nature also to enable construction. For instance, with nature-based solutions, i.e., instead of building a grey infrastructure project, we embed nature and then can use green or green-grey construction in order to make those projects more resilient and more sustainable. So how we start normally as an insurance company? First of all, we definitely have to identify the asset that we like to protect. Is it a coral reef? Is it a coastal line? Is it an office building? Whatever it is. Secondly, then we have to understand the risks. So what are the risk factors, the threats that can occur? How exposed is it to let's say storms, waves and so on. Then we need to determine the payout that is needed to either restore or repair. And then the last element is then always the funding. Now, if it's a commercial viable interest, so there very often the project pays for it. However, if it's a public good, then the question is really always who funds for it, especially for, let's say, emerging market. I mean, do you have donors' money? Do you have governments funded? Do you actually tap into the resources of the multilateral development banks? Or is it a public-private partnership that actually provides the premium payment to protect those assets? So with that one to the next slide, please. So if you think about insurance as a contingent finance element. Pre-event, you actually can do a lot with risk mitigation. You can also put away funds. However, insurance, when something happens, insurance is actually very convenient element to tap into to get then damages repaired or restored. Post-event, you can increase taxes, you can ask for donor assistance, raise debts, have budget reallocation. However, these measures are very often not very popular, and especially now in a post-COVID environment. I mean, especially public money is very stressed. So the pledge we would like to make is really look more into insurance to actually buy protection upfront rather than looking at post-event risk or finance mitigation measures. With that, we move to the next slide. So if you look at pre or post-event, I have here two examples. First of all, the Texel Island example, that's a nature-based solution that actually protects a strip of land in the Netherlands. So there were a number of options how to protect this coastal line. One would have been to build a grey infrastructure project. However, here the parties choose to actually have a nature-based solution. So what happened? We have some sand dunes here, which then provide some protection. And I come to the benefit in a second. Another protection mechanism is, for instance, in Quintana Roo, where we provided a parametric wind cover to protect or basically to restore coral reefs after an event. So what was the benefit of this solution was that a parametric payout is actually a very swift and very fast means to get money. So in this instance, the cover paid out roughly 2 weeks after an event. So a parametric payout works in a way that you define an index, and once, for instance, the magnitude or the size of a storm hits, we pay out depending on the wind speed. And the money is then paid out within, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks and can be used immediately for disaster risk prevention and restoration. So these are two elements where we either use nature to protect or where we help with insurance money to restore nature. So with that one, we move to the next slide. Here I have a number of our organizations that work very closely as a unity to provide all those protections which are highlighted here above. Allow me a couple of reflections. I mean, first of all, I think there's proof of concept of nature-based solutions, either in the built environment or to restore. However, the challenge really will be to achieve scale here. In order to do that, I think all of us have to promote more nature-based solutions wherever we can. In respect of laws and regulation, I think nature should actually be part of the taxonomy. I mean, it's going to happen already. It's also clear that we have to put the price tag on nature. Very often, the benefits that actually derive from nature are a public good. And I have to say, very often, if you look, for instance, in the textile example, the benefits that we think we derive from nature-based solutions are very much underestimated upfront. So, for instance, in textile, the tourism income that has been derived was actually heavily underestimated. I think there has not been a price tag or a value assigned, for instance, for mental health benefits. So I think a lot of these nature-based solutions actually underestimate the positive values they actually create. Also, a point I want to make, very often if you compare cost, we compare upfront cost compared to lifetime cost. Sometimes nature-based solutions are a little bit more, could be equally expensive or could be more expensive, but over the lifetime, these solutions actually provide very often to be cheaper over the lifetime. They are also more flexible. For instance, if you look at the sand dune system, these can easily be reconfigured. However, if you have a grey infrastructure where you build dams or dams, for instance, these are very much cast in stone, literally, and provide less flexibility. So I think the last point I want to make, it's really also a cooperation and a collaboration effort. So you need many stakeholders in order to make those solutions work. Insurance is part of the puzzle, because if it can't be insured, it probably will not get financed. So involve us early on in these concepts, in these discussions, and hopefully we can provide a positive contribution to make more of those projects happen. Again, I think the challenge really will be to achieve scale. And with that one, I'd like to hand back, please.
Well, thank you so much for your insights. I mean, I think, yeah, the scale point is really important. And I think one aspect that we haven't mentioned is obviously also in the context of, the efforts to achieve net zero, to move to a low carbon world. I mean, nature will have to play a significant role. And I think the question is also, what are we doing to actually ensure that, nature can play that role, and sort of adding that to the equation, I think, is a really important point. Before we go to the next part, we have a few minutes for questions to both our speakers. So are there any questions or reactions? Daniel, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Swenja, and thank you very much, Christian and Mike, for your great presentations. I have a question to Mike, and great to see you, by the way. On the modeling of the risk reduction or flood risk reduction benefits of mangroves, do you see any difficulty in modeling it throughout